Bloodborne has no shortage of terrifying monsters, ghastly phantasms, and otherwise brilliantly designed creatures, and somehow very few of these creatures have been properly immortalized in plastic. But today, I'm gonna do my part to fix that, and today's subject is a great one. Rom the Vacuous Spider, or as she's known in Japan, Roma the Idiotic Spider, or as she's known in my living room, you fucking cheap pile of spaghetti-looking caterpillar. Anyway, grant me your eyes and I'll give you some insight on how I went about emulating Rom. This is Kitbash Creatures. Today, I'll show you how I went about making Rom from scratch, along with a few of her gross kids and a chunk of Moonside Lake, so they have somewhere nice to hang out and murder me repeatedly. Much like Bloodborne, arts and crafts involve some trial and error, and this project had its challenges. I'll let you be the judge of how it all came together, but if nothing else, you can learn from my mistakes. In any case, join me in my hunter's workshop and let us sit about, speaking feverishly, chatting into the wee hours of whatever time it is where you are. Let's go make some spiders. For starters, I'm going to crumple up a bunch of aluminum foil to make the base for Rom's body, which I'll then cover with 2-part epoxy putty. Covering the foil with a thin layer of putty will dry a lot quicker than just making an enormous blob of the stuff. White putty doesn't retain fine details super well, and it takes a while to dry, but once it's cured, it is tough as nails. To grant Rom some eyes, I'm going to be jamming a bunch of beads into the putty. I found the larger black ones online, and they thankfully don't have any holes in them, and I'm sure that's a pain in the ass if you're trying to make a friendship bracelet, but they are perfect for cosmic spider eyeballs. And the tiny little gold ones are teeny tiny metal balls that get used for nail art. Rom's funny little tentacle tails are extremely fragile, so I'm going to make those individually and then glue them together and then keep that piece separate from the body so nothing gets broken during painting. Rom is supposed to have 10 tails, but I think we can get away with doing less. The putty I'm using here is a combination of the white epoxy from earlier and 2-part yellow and blue Kneadatite. This is my preferred material for sculpting. It holds details really well, it isn't too sticky, and it dries in a reasonable amount of time. Now, while I'm smushing this putty around, let's take a moment to talk about Rom's design. Fear is a prevalent theme in Bloodborne, and jumping off a high ledge into a body of water to fight a bunch of spiders preys on acrophobia, aquaphobia, and arachnophobia all at once. But a big one Rom sets off is trypophobia, a fear of closely grouped holes or dots. Plenty of folks get frightened or creeped out by closely grouped holes or dots. Most of them have probably noped out of this video by now, but scientists think that the amount of people who also feel disgust suggests that this aversion is rooted in a rational place, and that it's not an irrationally heightened fear like most other phobias, but possibly a primal defense mechanism to patterns that often indicate rot, decay, disease, or the face of a ginormous magic spider who will kill you with meteors. Anyway, I'm a huge arachnophobe, but Rom doesn't bother me because she looks more like a cross between Edvard Munch's The Scream and the part at the end of Eric Carle's The Very Hungry Caterpillar after the caterpillar eats that entire buffet and gets very large. Rom's kids are clearly spiders though, and this piece wouldn't look right without a few Romlings to keep any pesky hunters from whacking her in the patoot with a tonitrus. To make these little creepy crawlies, I'm running 5 long pieces of flexible wire through what will eventually become each spider's abdomen and thorax. That's how entomologists say spider tummies. I'll sculpt more detail on top here and then do the head separately and glue them on later. I'm a little bit worried the wire is looking too smooth, so I'm trying to rough it up a bit with pliers. In a perfect world, I'd use skinnier wire and then sculpt with putty on top of that, but I took a shortcut here. And I already have plenty on my plate with Rom, who has twice as many legs as your average spider. Speaking of which, to make those I cut lengths of a much thinner wire and then rolled them in putty. I let the putty cure a little bit before sculpting it, otherwise the wire just cuts through. Originally, I was going to cut the wire to the appropriate length to fit in each hole, but one upside to using the foil ball as a base is the putty's effectively hollow, and it was super easy to drill through the outer shell, and now the legs pop in really easily. I used some JB Kwik 2-part epoxy to put these in place because it's slow enough to cure that I can arrange the legs how I want them, and it's viscous enough that they'll stay put until then. Plus, it'll help fill in any gaps. Also, this stuff is tougher than nails, and I highly recommend it for your stubborn home repairs. But this isn't a home improvement show. This is a show where we make spiders out of goo, so back to the Rom Juniors. I've got their little tiny heads sculpted with the beads and all, and I wasn't able to get as much detail in there at that scale, but the legs are the real focal point of those baby spiders. After a lot of swearing, bending, several puncture wounds, and probably ruining a pair of old hobby shears cutting the ends into razor-sharp points, these legs actually look kinda like spider legs. Gross! They're still not quite as textured and chitinous as I'd like. I smeared some Mod Podge on there, hoping it'd give it some character, but I'll take what I can get. With Rom almost fully assembled, it's time to paint. With my airbrush, I'm spraying down some thinned Badger acrylic primer, laying down a layer of black on the bottom and in all the cracks and crevices, and then mixing in some gray to make the upper highlights. I'll do the same with the Romettes. I was totally fine when these looked like they were made out of gum and paper clips, but the second I painted them to look like real spiders, my brain was like, hey, don't animals that shape make you uncomfortable? And I got all squeamish. Now onto the fun part of painting, actually painting. Next, I did a bunch of washes followed by some dry brushing. If you're new to painting models or miniatures, these are two absolute must-learn skills that will make your project look a million times better than just painting them regularly. Washes are paint that's been thinned down to a consistency that'll make it run into all the cracks and corners without sticking everywhere else, so it accentuates shadows and creates contrast that brings out raised details and textures. You can make your own washes a variety of ways, or you can use pre-mixed washes like I'm doing. Dry brushing, as the name suggests, entails putting paint on your brush and wiping almost all of it off on a paper towel so the bristles are practically dry, then you run that lightly over a surface. The remaining pigment will catch on corners, edges, and raised details, creating highlights. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm fussing around a bit with washes and different layers to try to get the Vacuous Spider family looking the right shade of scary, and I really want to replicate that moody Bloodborne palette. Painting every single little eyeball is of course an undertaking. I used flat black initially, which didn't look quite right, so I slapped on some gloss, which immediately makes them look appropriately frenzy-inducingly gross. I know Rom doesn't cause frenzy, I meant like figuratively. Now, we're in a good spot with the spiders, which is a weird sentence, and while that's all drying, let's take a minute to figure out a base. I would love to do a big complicated diorama that showcases some of Bloodborne's hauntingly Baroque level design, in the literal, overly complicated sense, not the architectural sense, it's really more gothic. But alas, Rom lives in the middle of a giant, extremely shallow lake, which makes this part kinda easy. More talented model makers than me would make a mold and pour clear epoxy resin in to make the water, but instead I opted to cut a piece of dry erase board panel and a piece of an acrylic shelf to size. I'm sanding up the chalkboard side of the panel to rough it up a bit, and then slathering on some acrylic paint. I'm not too concerned with this looking pretty because I'm just gonna smear it up with Mod Podge and clamp it to the acrylic down on top of it. To make the water look like water, I smeared around a few layers of heavy acrylic gloss medium, let that dry, then put some Mod Podge on top of that. The brush strokes smooth out a bit as they dry, and it creates a surface that looks like water. Okay, now it's time for the part where I really screw everything up. Rom's got that glowing growth on her back, right? I'll be honest, I'm not sure what the hell that is in Bloodborne lore. My first guess was lumen flower blossoms, but after some research, I learned that Rom the Vacuous Spider is specifically regarded vacuous because she's kin to the cosmos, but one lacking in consciousness.
And that Bloodborne lore prospectors theorize this is due to not using lumen flowers during her ascension.
Which is really pretty obvious when you think about it. So anyway, to recreate Rom's cosmic crabgrass back hair that probably isn't lumen flowers, my initial plan was to use sparkly pipe cleaners. I was gonna drill holes in Rom's back and stick them in there, and it would look awesome, and I would basically be done. Of course, for starters, the epoxy I used for Rom's body is way too hard to drill once it's dried, and I'm too much of a vacuous idiot to have just poked holes in there in the first place. So instead, I had to cut a bunch of snippets of my cosmic arcane sparkly pipe cleaners, and then put bunches of those together in patches of hot glue. Then I airbrushed those white and silver to try to make the sparkly pipe cleaners look less like sparkly pipe cleaners. Then I trimmed the edges of the hot glue so it looked less like hot glue, and I just Mod Podged all that in place. And, well, I should be spanked with moon rocks for my beastly idiocy because these pipe cleaners look dumb as hell. It was a fun idea, but it just doesn't work, so I tracked down some pre-made miniature flowers that people use for terrain and dollhouses and stuff, and that feels like cheating to me. They came, but there's a whole new challenge now, which is painting them to look less like cute, pretty flowers and more like spider blossoms. So, airbrush time once again. Thankfully, they're self-adhesive, which makes my life easier, and after that I just went in and added some more highlights and shadows with the airbrush, and then hand-painted the blossoms with pure white so they'd pop a tiny bit more. Finally, I drilled a hole in Rom's belly and then in the base, and then put a screw through the bottom so she wouldn't fall off, which was nerve-wracking, and I also was probably very unsafe doing it. I'm sorry if there's any woodshop teachers watching this video. I laid down another layer of acrylic gloss medium around her and stuck the baby spiders in there since they're light enough that that'll hold them in place. Fear the old gloss. And with that, I think we're done. Prey slaughtered. I had an absolute blast making Rom, and all mistakes aside, I'm pretty proud of her. The baby spiders could use some work, but considering my original idea was to use those little plastic Halloween spiders, that could have turned out even worse than my pipe cleaner idea. So there you have it. If you stuck around through all the spiders, trypophobia, and my rambling, thank you so much for doing so. As you just saw, a lot of work went into this, and I want to keep doing these videos. So if you enjoyed this one, please do all that stuff that YouTubers frantically beg you to do at the ends of their videos. Hit the like button and share this video with everyone you know who likes Bloodborne, hates spiders, or enjoys arts and crafts here and there. Most importantly, leave me a comment telling me what creature, character, or contraption you'd like me to do for the next Kitbash creatures. It doesn't have to be from Bloodborne, or from a FromSoft game, or even from a video game at all. And if you want more videos like this one, check out the previous episodes that we've done for Far Cry 6 and Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance. Not enough people have watched them, and I worked equally hard on both of those. And with that, farewell, good hunter. Remember, for all the latest tips on finding your worth in the waking world, keep it locked to IGN.